Let's get started tonight. I'm a bit late, so we'll get started a bit late anyway. But we're going to read to begin with Psalm 119, verse 129, which I think is part of our reading for this week, our psalm reading this week, which says, "Your testimonies are wonderful, therefore my soul keeps them." Let's pray as we begin. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to be together tonight and to come to your word and to learn. Lord, help us to grasp its truth, to hold on to your promises, to love your word, and to keep it diligently in our hearts and our lives. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. As we talk about keeping promises and God doing his work in our life, we're going to start with this one. I have decided to follow Jesus. Follow Jesus by holding on to every promise, pursuing his promises, believing them, and keeping them in our heart. Stand on every promise of your sufficient grace for me, grace for all who will believe. We will stand on every promise of your word. Following that theme, the ability to stand on every promise and to follow is through Christ alone. Yet not I, but through Christ in me. What gift of grace is Jesus my Redeemer? There is no more for heaven now to give. He is my joy, my righteousness and freedom. you would like the notes with the questions and the outline on it tonight, just raise your hand and Anaya will get one to you. Should be plenty to go around. We're going to look in a couple of passages this evening. Where will we start? We'll start in Numbers. Numbers 14. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. They're at the beginning. Numbers 14 is where we'll start. Tonight is fairly simple and probably pretty obvious as we go through. Nothing new or I guess necessarily deep tonight, but I hope it will be encouraging and give you something to think about and pursue. It's something I've been thinking about for a while since we read through on Sunday morning, since we read through Joshua chapter 14 and 15. This has been rolling around in my mind for a while, and so we'll get to that tonight. And it's to look at, just briefly, and take a few thoughts from the life of Caleb, and learn some things from Caleb, who we have read about lately. His life, there are a lot of things to learn from Caleb, even though he's only got just a short few things to look at in Numbers and in Joshua. Still, there's things to look at about his life of faith, about his courage, about his leadership, his boldness and his godliness. There are a lot of lessons we could take from his life and learn from. But there is also, while we'll look at a couple of lessons, one of the things there is not just to learn from Joshua, but in Caleb, but in Caleb's life is to look at some of the great lessons of God, who we see of God. And one of those things is in the life of Caleb, we see God's great expansive grace. And just to set that up as we go, I think this might be the first question on your notes. I can't remember if I put it in or not. It says, from Numbers 13, did I tell you to go to Numbers or Joshua? Numbers. Oh, good. Okay, that's where we start. Numbers 13. So from Numbers 13, verse 6, and you can refer over to Joshua 14 as well. That's where we're going to be tonight. So Numbers 13 and 14 and Joshua 14 and 15. But if you have a look at that, just read through Numbers 13 verse 6, and you can have a look at chapter 14 of Joshua and verse 6. All I'm asking is, what does it tell us there about who Caleb is? And some of the things that it tells us, just briefly, just simply about the man himself. About Caleb. Sorry? From the tribe of Judah? Sorry? Son of Jephunneh. Is it, let me just, it might be the Joshua passage, Joshua 14, that gives us the other detail there, where it says Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and it says something else about him. That's right, the Kenizzite. Now, let me throw this out there, and if you know, really good. What's a Kenizzite? Anybody know who the Kenizzites are? If you don't know, that's okay, because, who would know? It's not like it's a major thing there. However, by looking at these couple of details, that he is the son of Jephunneh, and you dig a little bit to find out who he is, but that he's from the tribe of Judah, and he's a Kenizzite, tells us something about him. So one thing we're told is he is chosen as the representative. So as they go into the land of Canaan, to spy out the land of Canaan, we know the story. They take one person from each tribe to represent them, and they go to spy in. Caleb is the representative that is sent for Judah and chosen for Judah. As said, he's from the lineage, or he is a Keznite, which is from the lineage of Kenaz. Now, what's interesting about that, and this is really the thing we want to know, is the Kenazites are not Israelites. They're not Jews. So Caleb, by his lineage and by his thing, is not an Israelite. And yet here he is, this man who is not an Israelite, is called part of the tribe of Judah and is called to represent Judah as they go in and look through the land. Now, there is debate, because it's hard, and to get through this, it takes a lot of digging, and you've got to follow a lot of lines. So we're not going to do all of that tonight, because there's a lot of name things and stuff to get through. I'll do that when you need to go to sleep later tonight. But we'll get the short version of it. So there is some debate. Some connect him with Caleb, the son of Hezron. Others say, no, that's not. And the reason that makes that important is you find Hezron in the lineage of Jesus Christ, which would mean not only is he not an Israelite, not a Jew, and becomes part of Judah, but he is also brought in as part of the lineage of Christ. But with a lot of things, it's hard to say definitively that this is so. Nevertheless, if that is who Caleb is, that's an amazing thing. But whether that's who he is or not, even if he's in the lineage of Christ or not, one thing is sure. He is not an Israelite, and so he does not have any right to the land. He's not an Israelite. He doesn't receive the promise from God to Israel about what is the land. He is brought in Israel. Now, we know, we've read the story, and we'll jump ahead. Of course, you know how the story ends is he goes and he gets an inheritance, and he is promised an inheritance by God and by Moses in the land that he is not, by legality, supposed to have. Still, by God's grace and his following of Christ, following of God, he becomes a great inheritor of the promises of God. So in Caleb, not just through what he does, but in the way that God takes him, someone who is not a Jew, brings him in, folds him into Judah of all the tribes, and then gives him an inheritance in the land, is an expression of God's great grace and the expansiveness of God's great grace. But that's just a side thing to show the greatness of God's grace in the life of Caleb. Let's see what expands out of that as we look at his life. And so I'm going to look at three aspects of his life, the beginning and the end. And the first is Caleb's courageous faith. Right, so the three things we're going to look at is Caleb's courageous faith, his enduring faith, and his inspiring faith. And so they're the three things we'll consider tonight. And so as we consider his courageous faith, as we look here in Numbers, we see his faith in God. Let's read through the end of Numbers chapter 13 tonight. So from verse 26 of Numbers 13, it says, "Now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron." And so that's the 12 spies who went into Canaan to check it out. It says, "Now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Then they told him and said, 'We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan.' Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, 'Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it.' But the men who had gone up with him said, 'We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. So we were in their sight." That's obviously the report of the 12 that come back, having spied out the land to go in. Now, given the reason they're looking at it is because they're planning to go in and to take this land. So what had God promised Israel about the land of Canaan? I've given you a couple of references there, Joshua chapter 1, verse 3 to 6 and 13, Deuteronomy if you want to have a look at them. But what had God promised Israel about this land and about entering it? They would inherit the land. So God said, "I'm going to give you this land." In fact, he says, "Every place you set your foot, I will give it to you." Anything else he says about going into that land? Right, he's going to drive out the inhabitants and says, "No one will be able to stand before you." Right, so these are the promises God has made to them. Any other promises or things God makes about entering this land to Israel? So that he would give them the land, everywhere they set their foot would be theirs, and he lays out the dimensions, if you will, of that land. He says that no one will be able to stop them. It will be theirs, and they will retain it. God will be with them. He promises his presence to them as they do it. Yes. He promises that with all those things to be true, that this land will be to them a land of rest if they obey him. If they walk in and they follow him, it will be a land of rest. And in every place where God makes these promises, there is always the note and there is always what follows. It's that God will do this, but they need to obey. They need to do what God says. Now, we know, probably most of us are familiar with the story of the spies and the failure of Israel. So, as we read, these 12 spies, they go in, they see the land is beautiful and wonderful and bountiful, but has enemies in it that are strong and powerful. So the 10 obviously say, "No, we're not going in. We don't think we should go in." And they scare the people. The 2, Joshua and Caleb, say, "No, we should go. And we really ought to do this." But they don't get believed. And so the people go with the 10. They know we're not going to do it. And refuse to go in. Now, if you look, and I told you we'd be here, so if you have got a bookmark, you might want to put it in there if you can go in Numbers 14. In Numbers 14, I think verse 11 is where we've got there. The people say, "We're not going in. We're not going to go into the land. We're not going to do it." And God is angry, and he describes his anger to them. Why was God so angry with the people not wanting to enter the land of Canaan? They didn't believe him. You didn't believe me. Is there anything that draws that out a little further too? That's definitely said there, and that is the reason. They didn't believe him.
Because they'd seen all the signs and all the things he'd done.
So it wasn't just that they didn't believe him. I mean, that made God angry. They didn't believe him. It was the fact that they didn't believe him, even though they had seen all the miraculous signs he had done to get them there. What has God done to get them to the border of the land of Canaan? The miraculous things. What miraculous things has God done as they have travelled to Canaan? Well, the Exodus, right? And everything to go with the Exodus. So even preceding that, you've got the plagues that come. You've got the people of Egypt giving their wealth to Israel. The deliverance, they go out, the sea opens. Everything about the Exodus is miraculous and amazing. So the Exodus itself should be enough, but of course, that was 40 years ago. Maybe you forget. Meanwhile, what else has happened? Sorry? Food for them. Yeah, provided food for them. Manna every day, and then, they complain about the manna, and so God gives them quail. So they had food every day, and manna and quail. Water out of a rock. When they have no water, God brings water out of a rock. Guiding them by pillar of cloud and fire by night. That's not just a ordinary thing. I've never seen that. That's pretty miraculous. When they do find water, and the water is undrinkable, by throwing a stick in, the water becomes sweet. The waters of Marah. They've had that. They had been attacked by the Amalekites. And this band of people who were slaves overcomes the mighty Amalekites with Moses' arms in the air. All of these things God has done on their way to get them to the border of Canaan, to a land that he has said, when you get there, I will go with you in there. I have promised it to you. I will give you everything in there. No one will stand before you. And just so you know that that's exactly what I'll do, I have done all these things already. Everything is there, and they get there and say, no. Too scary, not going to do it. And so God is angry. Now, what does that have to do with Caleb, you say? Numbers chapter 14 and verse 24. Why, out of all this, does God say he will allow Caleb to go into the land? All that generation is going to perish in the wilderness. Why does Caleb get to go in? He has a different spirit. Something different about him. What is different about him? He follows God wholly. He follows God wholly. Caleb is different than the others. There is a different spirit in him. And he follows God wholly. Here is a man who has faith in God. But that faith in God translates into, or is seen in, a faith in the face of opposition. Now, 2 times in Numbers. So in Numbers 13 verse 30 and in chapter 14 and verse 6. So 2 times Caleb stands before the people to encourage them to go in. In Numbers 13, in fact, it almost sounds like, the people are arguing and Caleb stands up in front of Moses to quiet the people and speak to the people. Like he's taking charge and he's going to say, no, I was there, I'm going to do this. So he's not just a shy, sit back kind of guy. But twice in this, once on his own and then with Moses and Aaron and Joshua, he encourages the people to do what God told them to do. Do you think that was an easy decision for him to make? To stand before these people and say, no, we should go. Why wouldn't it be an easy decision, or why would it? Perhaps, maybe he thinks they'll look down on him because he's not officially Israel. Perhaps. Yeah. But they were going to kill him, right? They pick up stones, don't they, to throw them at Joshua and Caleb and go, we really don't want to go in, so we're going to kill you so that whatever you say doesn't get past this. So standing up to say he believes God put him in a place where he was in physical danger. This was not an easy thing for him to do. Perhaps in one way it was an easy decision for him, in that he had made the decision already, because there was a different spirit in him, that he was going to do what God had promised, that he was going to do what God said to do. So maybe he'd made that decision already in his own heart. I believe God. God said we're going to do it. We should do that. So maybe in that sense it was an easy decision, in that he'd already made up his mind, I'm going to do what God says to do. Still, maybe you know this as well as Caleb did. Even when you make up in your own mind, in your own heart, I'm going to do what God says to do, when the time comes to do it and you face opposition, it's not so easy to put it into practice, is it? You know, when you've got people picking up stones ready to throw at you because you're saying what they don't want to hear, that's not such an easy time to stick to your commitments. It's an easy thing to put away. So keeping a commitment like that, even when it's deeply held, isn't easy in the face of opposition. Yet he still does it. So perhaps another thing to draw out of this is the temptation to conform. Peer pressure, we sometimes maybe refer to it, is a battle we face at every age. It's not just something for teenagers and young people, the peer pressure that comes on us to do the wrong thing. Peer pressure, the need to feel or conformed, is a pressure we will feel in many places and many times at every age. So why do you think, given the pressure from outside, despite what he's had inside, the pressure from outside, why do you think Caleb is able to stand so firmly on his decision to enter the land of Canaan? Given there's people ready to pick up stones and throw him, why can he stand there and say, no, we should go, when it would be so easy to say, well, the majority doesn't want to go, maybe we should just do that? He believed God. He believed God's promises. Right? God had told, well, it starts back with Abraham. And then God had told who he knew, Moses, these things, and he'd heard it from Joshua and others around him. He knew. And so having believed God's promises, he committed himself to pursue that way. And unlike everybody else in Israel, he didn't take God's previous miracles and previous work for granted. Like, he didn't look back and go, water from a rock. That doesn't mean he can conquer a nation. He believed that what God had done was worth it. He clearly followed Moses' instructions. What were Moses' instructions when they go into the land? Deuteronomy chapter 6, right? Which we know as the Shema, right? Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is one God. Love him with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Obey him. These were the commands Moses gave to the people as they went in. Caleb took that to heart. If I'm going to see God do what he said, I'm going to do exactly that. There is a question there maybe for us to consider, you think about it on your own, which is, in what situations do you find it difficult to stand up for God? What could help you stand strong in those times? Now, every one of us are going to be able to answer that with something. There are times where we find it difficult to stand up for God, where we feel the pressure to conform. What would that be, and how could we stand strong in those times? Well, I think just briefly to throw out a couple of things here as you think about that is, like Caleb, if we're going to stand strong in times where we feel to conform, before that, we have needed to make the commitment that we are going to do what God says. So before the pressure comes, say, I'm going to do what God says. And that's going to be a commitment of my heart. which means I need to read and study God's word, which was part of the Shema. Believe God's promises. And then what Caleb had, which was also helpful, was by his side he had Joshua, and behind him he had Moses and Aaron. People who would stand there with him to make those decisions. Have people that you can lean on when you feel like you're being pressured. Maybe it's somebody that you can go straight to there, or who's there with you in the moment. Or maybe it's somebody, you say, when you're feeling the pressure to conform, to text or call and say, hey, I need some strength. But have some people with you. That's Caleb's courageous faith. So let's jump. We're going to jump into Joshua now, and I don't think we'll come back to Numbers a lot, but Joshua 14 and 15, as we look at his enduring faith. So we're coming to the end of his life now, or toward the end, where we read in church just a few weeks ago. Joshua chapter 14, and the first portion of this begins in verse 6 of Joshua 14. So it says, then the children, so this is, they've gone into the land, so they've done their wilderness wanderings and all of that as punishment. They are now into the land. Joshua's let them in. You've had Jericho and Ai, and we've read Joshua. So after all of that, it says in verse 6, then chapter 14, verse 6, then the children of Judah came to Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, you know the word which Yahweh said to Moses, the man of God, concerning you and me in Kadesh Barnea. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of Yahweh, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought back word to him as it was in my heart. Nevertheless, my brethren, who went up with me, made the heart of the people melt, but I wholly followed Yahweh my God. So Moses swore on that day, saying, surely the land where your foot has trodden shall be your inheritance, and your children's forever, because you have wholly followed Yahweh my God. And now, behold, Yahweh has kept me alive, as he said, these 45 years, ever since Yahweh spoke this word to Moses while Israel wandered in the wilderness. And now, here I am this day, 85 years old. As yet, I am strong this day as on the day that Moses sent me. Just as my strength was then, so now is my strength for war, both for going out and for coming in. Now, therefore, give me this mountain of which Yahweh spoke in that day. For you heard in that day how the Anakim were there, and that the cities were great and fortified. It may be that Yahweh will be with me, and I shall be able to drive them out, as Yahweh said. Joshua blessed him and gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, as an inheritance. Hebron, therefore, became the inheritance of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, to this day. Behold, he wholly followed Yahweh, God of Israel. And the name of Hebron formerly was Kirjath Arba. Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim. Then the land had rest from war. So we come to the end of his life to look at Caleb's enduring faith. As we look here, one of the things we learn from is to persevere to the promise. Persevere to the promise. So quickly, how old, it tells us in the text we just read, how old was Caleb when he first spied out the land? 40. So he was 40 years old when he spied out the land. How long did he have to wait until he got the promise fulfilled? 45 years. He was 40 when he went into the land. 45 years later, he will finally get the opportunity to get his inheritance and to take the land that was promised to him. I love the confidence and the confident faith in God's providence that we see with Caleb. He says, Yahweh has kept me alive. And he says, I am as strong this day as on the day Moses sent me. That is a firm conviction that God kept him for this day. He believes, after all the war and everything that he has been through for 85 years, God has kept him alive until that day. But not just that. It's not just that God kept him alive, like maybe we see in the New Testament with Simeon. It says, God kept me alive so that I could see the promised, and then he dies. Here, Caleb says, God has kept me alive, but he hasn't just kept me alive. I'm as strong today as I was when I was 40. So God has not only kept him alive, he has kept him strong and healthy for 45 years to get to this moment. And Caleb believes that deeply. God has kept him. A belief in God and a belief in God's faithfulness to his promise motivated to continue on. He was going to continue. For 45 years he waited. Moses promised him this land, and he didn't see it. Two things I learn here, well, at least two things, but two things that I see here for tonight is, one, the importance of clinging to God's promises. Just clinging to God's promises. On Friday night we talked with the men about John Paton, and that was one of the things about John Paton, was he just clung to the promises of God. Over and over through his life you hear him quote the simple phrase from Matthew 28 verse 20, "Lo, I am with you always." While he's sitting in a tree with the potential to be killed, he is at great peace. "Lo, I am with you always." He clung to the promises of God, and that's Caleb. Cling to the promises, not just hearing the promises of God, not just saying, I believe the promises of God, but clinging to them, making them an anchor of your life. So I see in him the importance of clinging to God's promises, but also the importance of just having patience. Just being patient. That's why I think the clinging is so important. If we're not clinging to God's promises, we're not going to be patient. Cling to God's promises and have patience. God will always keep his promises, but they don't always come immediately. It takes time. Don't lose sight of God's promises. And don't settle for less because they don't come quickly. Sometimes we say, God's promised in his word that I'm going to grow, or the sanctification process that comes in me. He's promised these things and I just don't see it. And so we settle, thinking it's just never going to come. And I just settle for it. Don't settle. Cling to his promise and pursue it. Be patient. In Hebrews chapter 10, he uses this illustration for this very thing about perseverance. He says in Hebrews 10 verse 36, he says, "For you have need of endurance, so that after you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise." And he's using this very moment of them entering the land as an example of that. Persevere. Persevere, and you will receive the promise. If we compare that, so Hebrews 10 verse 36, which says, "For you have need of endurance, so that after you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise." If we compare that to the people in Numbers 14 verse 4, it says, "So they said to one another, 'Let us select a leader and return to Egypt.'" They're standing on the verge of having God's promises, and it's too hard for them, so let's go back where it's easier. Which reminds us that if we're going to have an enduring faith, we need to be prepared to fight for the promise. Prepared to fight for the promise. What was the main reason that the 10 spies gave, and you can do this just from memory, or I think there's a reference there, but what was the main reason the 10 spies gave for not wanting to enter Canaan? Sorry? They were scared. Scared of what? The giants. Right? They're scared of the Anakim, the sons of Anak. So they see these who are great hulking people and they go, no, they're too big for us. Caleb says, no, we can do it. God's with us. We can do it. So they're scared of the giants of Anakim and their strong fortified cities. At 85 years old, where does Caleb ask for an inheritance? The Anakim. The very people that scared them off at the beginning is the place an 85-year-old man says, give me that. The hardest place, the giants of the land.
Pastor, I remember Jesus said that if you have this small faith that you can remove the mountain, which means the impossible will make possible.
That's right, yeah, faith is a mustard seed. Yeah, that's exactly right. He wants the land of the Anakim. He still believes, 45 years later, he still believes the promise God made back then, that God would drive them out, God will still keep. He still believes that promise. After all of these years, you look down into Joshua chapter 15 and verse 14, and you find what happens. Joshua chapter, I could tell you, or just have you read it. Joshua 15 verse 14. What happens? He drove them out. 45 years later, or 45 years before, they scared him, and Caleb said, no, we can do this. Then 45 years later, they're still there, and Caleb says, no, God said we could drive them out. And so he did it, and God did exactly that. An 85-year-old man drew out an army of giants because he believed God and did what God said. Just as a way of going back a little, Joshua chapter 10 and verse 38. So amongst the places of this, just to give it some context so you know what I'm talking about, one of the cities in this area is Debir, right? So that's Hebron, Debir is all part of the area where he's at. So Joshua 10 verse 38, what do you see happen in Joshua 10 verse 38? Sorry? Oh, sorry, I thought I heard somebody say. Right, so they've already fought this area. They fought this area and had victory here. This is before Caleb. Right, so Israel has gone in, they've battled this area, they've won, and they've moved on. While they were fighting in other places, clearing out other parts of the land, the enemy has moved back in, and they've rebuilt their cities, and they've come back. We don't just need patience in pursuing God's promises, but we also need persistence and vigilance. Caleb is going in there to fight them and remove them from the land for his own inheritance because they were put out once and came back. God made a promise to Israel and to Joshua and to Caleb, and experiencing that promise, as Caleb takes us to experience that promise, it came through obedience and hard work. Right? So when we talk about clinging on to the promises of God, when we talk about knowing the promises of God, holding on to the promises of God, We do not mean read the promises of God, go, that's cool, I'll just wait for God to do it. To experience, more often than not, to experience the blessings and the promises of God means obeying what God said to get the promise. Right, Caleb was not going to get that land by just waiting for Anak to die. He had to fight it. He had to do the work. He had to obey God. What is admirable about Caleb is he believed God to the very end, and he fought he fought the enemy to the very end. He didn't give up. There is also, and this is kind of where we're bringing it to an end, there is also, I think, in Caleb a great deal of humility. For the 45 years before he gets his own inheritance that he had been promised, what is he doing? He is fighting other people's battles. He's clearing land for other people. He is helping other people know the joy of God's promises. 45 years he spent obeying God so that others could know the promises of God. And he finally receives his own great blessing. Lastly, and this is more a transition thing, and that is Caleb's inspiring faith. And that's the last section of chapter 15 that mentions it. And I'll just pass by this quickly because it sort of leads us into our next study that we're going to get into from next week. What we find out is Caleb goes in and he gets the land. We've read this in chapter 15 before. He gets the land. He gives a portion to his daughter, Achsah, who shows faith by saying, like you, Dad, I want more. I want what God has really given. I want not just desert, I want wells and springs. His faith, his courage, and his strength is found in his daughter. But not only does he inspire faith in his daughter, we're introduced to a man named Othniel. Othniel gets to marry Achsah, and it's sort of arranged. It's not forced, even though it sort of seems like that. But Othniel is a man who we come to find out is also, like Caleb, a man of courage and faith, who is inspired by Caleb and follows him. Now, what we're going to find out in the weeks ahead, because we're going to transition, we're going to do a short study through Judges. So we're going to get to Othniel probably 2 weeks. What we find out about Othniel is this. Othniel is he is the first judge of Israel, and he is the most godly and probably the best judge of Israel. Caleb's faith inspired courageous, enduring faith in others. So let's pursue to be people of courageous, enduring faith that inspires courageous, enduring faith in other people. And to do that, that means let God's word abide in your heart, cling to his promises, and obey what he says. I forgot to bring it. Anaya, could you just, on my desk is a little Pathways Bible study book. Can you just bring that out? So if you want to go up and do that thing, you can do that. Right, so like I said, next week we're going to jump into a study through Judges. We're going to make our way through this one. It's titled "There Was No King in Israel," and I'll have ones printed out so you can use them. But if you want to get your own copy, it's $10. They've got them at Koorong, or you can download it. And we'll just go. It's just a brief overview through Judges, And I thought we'll do that because I keep mentioning judges along the way, and there's a few blank looks when I talk about losing my knife in people. So we're going to do that. We're going to go through judges over the next week. So if you want to get your own copy to write in, that's it. Otherwise, I will have Sunday. I will have some printed copies if you want to take them home and look ahead at the questions and things, so you can take those home. And I'll have some copies available, but printed copies available. But if you want your own, that's the one we're going to go through. Any